garden party to reminisce with my old friends.
Welcome to my garden. My name is Ryan Bulis and I'm a graduating MFA here at UCSB. This is my thesis project, Garden Variety, as part of the MFA exhibition at the Museum of Art, Design and Architecture, titled Inside Out. The exhibition includes a variety of garden statuary and lawn games that the audience is encouraged to interact with. So the origins of this project come directly out of the garden site itself. It was introduced to me as the museum's sculpture garden, and so my research took me into the garden as a cultural object, and that distinction was about an architectural space that separated civil society from kind of the wilderness of nature. And all of the garden statuary that we might be familiar with today seem to reference that kind of distinction. Most notably would be the architectural green man mask, which I have up on the main wall. This mask was originally a depiction of Dionysus, god of wine, revelry, dancing, everything that a more puritanical society might deem as demonic, perhaps. And that demonic association with Dionysus spread throughout the Roman Empire, and as that empire became Christian, those attitudes about nature were projected onto an evilness. And so a lot of the Catholic and Celtic imagery of the green man appears to be demonic in some way. But the origins of that statuary are really about celebrating Dionysus and the garden, and those celebrations would take place in a garden-like setting, and would include wine and dancing and general revelry. Other features that you'd be familiar with are the garden gnome, which also goes back into antiquity. The earliest garden statuary was this image of Priapus, which was a fertility figure in ancient Rome and ancient Greece, and this fertility figure was said to be the offspring of Dionysus and Aphrodite, and it was kind of a reminder of the garden as a place of fertility and bounty, and as a warning that this garden was protected by a higher power. And it was a reminder to people that may steal from that garden that there are consequences for your actions. And whether the statuary actually came alive and took out revenge, that's a different thing, but that was the mythos surrounding the sculpture, is that it was the protector of the garden, and it would come to life at night and take out its revenge on those who stole from that space. And through similar imperial influence, this statuary moved north with the Roman Empire, and the imagery was displaced by kind of local legends and local imagery, and we associate the gnome today with Nordic countries and Britain. And it has lost a lot of its kind of fertility influence. And what I found comical is that you might have these fertility gods in your garden or in a garden, throughout the Western world, without any of that knowledge. So the lawn jockey would be the most contemporary garden statuary that I included in the garden. And it has a similar past that has been repressed in our common knowledge in a similar way to the gnome and the green man mask. The origin of the lawn jockey is said to have been made as a memoriam by George Washington for his stable boy, Jocko Reeves, who was the son of a freed slave, and during the crossing of the Delaware during one battle, it was a particularly cold night, and Jocko's instructions were to hold a lantern and to tend to the horses, and he believed in the revolution so much that he froze to death still clinging to that lantern. And Washington felt so responsible for this that he made a memoriam at a fort for him that was kind of a neoclassical image of Jocko holding a lantern in a less iconic pose than maybe we would know today. In the early 1800s, the statue began to be manufactured for a hitching post, and it was still somewhat neoclassical. The arm wasn't erect; it was just kind of forward. And later uses for this statuary were during the Underground Railroad, where a slightly more Sambo image of the lawn jockey was used to point towards safe houses along the Underground Railroad. And there was a kind of masquerade that took place in this racist imagery that allowed for these signs to be in plain sight. And there was great risk, and this was kind of a heroic moment for the history of the lawn jockey. And then later versions that we might be familiar with today, the kind of iconic lawn jockey, close to what I've represented here, were to honor kind of early racehorse jockeys that were all African American, and the first winners of the Kentucky Derby were all honored with these kind of statuaries. And it wasn't until the 70s, in the kind of heat of the civil rights movement, that they were seen as pejorative, and they began to be painted over and whitewashed to somehow be more PC, and yet it totally erases these histories, and we lose track of what I think is an important icon. And it's exciting to think about, no matter how mythic some of these tales are, they can be really rich.